Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our program. My name is Helen Liu, and I'm the Programming and Partnerships Manager at Cary Library. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Cary Library Foundation. Their support enables us to bring programs like today's event to you. I would also like to thank Wanaka Buchanan and Lexington Human Services for partnering with us on this program. Today, Heather Stang will help you explore various resources aimed at coping with grief, including practical strategies, community support options, and self-care techniques. This program is being recorded and will be posted to the library's YouTube channel. I want to respect the privacy of those attending today, so if you'd like to ask a question, feel free to submit it to the Q&A. Only the panelists can see those questions. Otherwise, feel free to submit your question in the chat. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Heather Stang is the author of Navigating Loss, Living with Grief, and the guided journal From Grief to Peace. She holds a master's degree in thanatology from Hood College and is a certified Phoenix Rising yoga therapist. Her 8-step mindfulness and grief system that is featured in the Handbook of Grief Therapies and is the foundation of a self-care focused online grief support group, Awaken. Heather also hosts the Moving Grief podcast, the Mindfulness and Grief podcast, and offers private sessions and professional training through her organization, the Mindfulness and Grief Institute. Welcome, Heather. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Helen. I really am grateful to the Cary Library in the town of Lexington. And I am grateful for those of you who are watching both live and on the recording. I'm glad you showed up because the holidays are an extra hard time when you're grieving. Not that any given day that ends with Y isn't a challenge when you've lost somebody you love. And while I wish none of you needed to be here, I'm just genuinely glad that you have chosen to be here. It means that you are seeking comfort, support, and hopefully some guidance as you move forward through this difficult season, both in the year and in your life. And I always like to start by saying right off the bat, I am no different from you. Yes, I have a master's degree in death, dying, and bereavement. I've studied yoga therapy and meditation, but that's not where the heart of my work comes from. The reason I do this work is because of my own stories of love and loss, which began really during the holidays when I was 7 years old. And I'm sharing with you members of my family and friends who have died, but I want to draw particular attention to the photo in the middle, the faded pink one from the 70s. And that's my Uncle Doug holding me when I was a baby, obviously. And Doug died by suicide only a month before Thanksgiving. And by the time the holidays rolled around, obviously we were still reeling, still confused, still grieving. My grandmother, who had just lost her son, did what she always did during the holidays and prepared a beautiful Southern meal. And it included quail that my grandfather had hunted that morning, lima beans, mashed potatoes, homemade gravy, you name it, everything just like the years before. But as you know, that year was very different. Everything had changed. And I could feel it even as a 7-year-old because children still grieve, children feel, children love. And there was this heavy unspoken grief that lingered throughout the the winter season and really the holidays forever thereafter. There was kind of an unspoken rule that we weren't to mention Doug. No one was allowed to talk about him. No one was certainly allowed to talk about the way he died. And I remember sitting there watching all the grown-ups pretend that everything was fine, but knowing deep inside myself that nothing was okay. And this silence became what I call the culture of our family grief from that day forward. And my grandmother Edna, who's also on the screen, you see her over on the lower left in the wheelchair. And by the way, she smiled right before and after this photo, but she refused to smile in photos even before Doug's death. Um, but to cope with the loss, she created a narrative that she told people that Doug had been robbed at gunpoint. And that was her way of coping with the devastation of this loss. And over the years, this story for Edna was repeated so many times that by the time she died at 99 and a half, and she had dementia for about 6 years before that, that story was very real to her. That was what she remembered. And while I understand that was her way of coping with the loss, and even after I got my master's degree and became a grief counselor, I never felt it was appropriate to challenge my grandmother on that. But I realized that our inability to talk about Doug, to remember Doug, to talk about what his life meant to those who remembered him and what his absence meant to the rest of us, it meant that our relationships within the family was missing something too. We couldn't connect the way we could have. My mother, my grandmother, and I never shared the depth of our feelings that we felt around him, and his absence left an empty chair, not just at that Thanksgiving table, but in our ability to bond as his survivors. And so we carried our grief in isolation, and my mom and I would talk about him a little bit over the years, but it wasn't until I started writing about what his death meant to me in my master's degree program that she and I really opened up a line of communication around Doug that has, I think, deepened our relationship and really helped my mom. I didn't realize how heavy it was on her to not be able to talk about what her brother's loss meant to her. So that's my story, part of my story. There are many other losses since, but that is what I think of as my grief origin story and why talking about grief in the holidays is so important to me now. So, why are the holidays extra hard? We know grief is already hard. Well, there's heightened emotions during the holidays, number one. There's a contrast between past joy you may have experienced around the holidays, like little Heather sitting there with that beautiful holiday spread at age 6 was, for all I can remember, amazing and magical and everything Thanksgiving should have been. And then you're contrasting it with the current loss. There's the societal pressures to be happy. It's the holidays and expectations that you show up to events that you may not feel like attending. Constant reminders are everywhere. It early and earlier in my online grief group, do we start talking about the holidays because, the trees are going up in Costco before Halloween is even over. And so that prolongs the season, and the music and the smells, these hit us in our emotional centers, and we can't get away from that. There's a disruption of routines and traditions. For some people, going to work every day is a nice way of staying normal during grief. Other people don't feel like working, and neither is right or wrong. But when those routines get disrupted for the people that find comfort in repetition, that can make it extra hard. And of course, the traditions that you shared with your loved ones. Do we do it this year or not? We're going to talk about that a little further down the road in this workshop. And then finally, and probably the one that I'm asked about the most and that I experience personally the most is that shift in social and familial connections. So, whether like me, you have a family who doesn't communicate, or people communicate in different ways, or it's that your friends don't know what to say, and either they don't invite you to enough things or they invite you to too many things. For many of us, there is a big change in where we get our support and how we get our support. And I want to say, even though I know it's really, really hard and I wish it were not normal, but it is, um, having a shift in your support system is more common than not. There's a phrase in the grief world that the death of a loved one changes your address book. People that you thought were going to be able to show up for you don't. And then sometimes you get surprised by maybe a classmate you haven't seen in a long time or a colleague you weren't close with who seeks you out and says, "Hey, I went through this too and I understand." So while there usually are losses in friendships, often there are also gains as well. And I want to say before I dive into the tips, how to get through the holidays, that everybody's grief is precious and your experience of loss is as unique as your relationship with the person who died and yourself. This is why, if you're in a group of siblings and a family member died that you all had the same relationship with by title, that you're each going to experience loss differently. So sometimes you don't get to lean on the people closest to you or the people who are experiencing the same loss. And because your grief is so unique and special, what you need may be different from the people closest to you. And in fact, there might be things that I share in this workshop that you're like, no, that's not for me. That's not what I feel. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm actually um, hoping to give you a path that's clear enough to help you feel like you can tend to your pain and take a few steps forward on your journey, but that's also broad enough to account for individual differences. Grief is not linear. It is very unpredictable. And even though we have data on what to expect with grief, we know that day to day, it's so very different. So, that being said, I hope you will take to heart what I offer you, but modify things as you need to. And again, put your questions in either the chat or Q&A. If you have a question about something I'm saying right now, you need clarity around one of the instructions, um, we'll try to address it during the webinar. If it's a question about grief in general or about your particular situation or the holidays, there'll be time for a Q&A at the end. So I've based this workshop around what I call the grief sensitive winter holiday planner. And all of you are going to get this in an email from Helen after the event. I'm going to be using little screenshots of that to walk you through different sections, but I want you to be able to just be present and focus on the suggestions I'm making without feeling like you have to fill out a worksheet during this workshop. So this is what this worksheet looks like. And I created it because I find that when we have a plan in place, it can reduce our anxiety around the holiday season. This is also true for grief anniversaries, which might include the day of someone's death or their birthday or an anniversary. And I created another worksheet before this that was called the Special Day Planner that inspired this worksheet. So, my hope is this will help you kind of collect your thoughts and your feelings, understand what your coping skills are, assess your traditions so that you can have a meaningful holiday, even if you're feeling sad, even if you're missing the person. So, the first thing I want to teach you, and you may know some of these and you may have your own, is grounding techniques. And this is going to relate to the coping skills section of the worksheet, but I want to give it to you up front in case while I'm talking or while you're remembering or while you're feeling your grief, you feel overwhelmed. It's normal and natural to feel overwhelmed by emotions when you're grieving. And there are also things you can do to calm your nervous system and try to come back to center so that you can address what's actually coming up. So while I don't have time to teach you every single one of these, I'm gonna teach you just one because that could be a whole workshop in itself. But I'm gonna go through them. So probably my number one go-to coping technique is counting each breath because counting is something I can do no matter how stressed out I am most of the time. I'll say 99% of the time. And so all you do here is you just breathe naturally. And each time you breathe, you count starting with the number 10. And each exhale, you go down a number. So 10, 9, 8. With each natural exhale, when you hit the bottom, when you hit one, you just go back up and down. You can do a 3-part breath. People have probably told you to take a deep breath. Not everybody likes taking deep breaths, by the way. And if you don't like taking a deep breath, don't listen to your body. But if you take a deep breath, you might pay attention to how the breath fills up your belly and then your middle section and then your chest. So you're basically feeling the 3 parts of the breath. And then as you exhale, you're feeling your chest, your middle section, and your belly. Another breath technique is to pair a calming word with your exhale and repeat that word silently to yourself. So it might be a word as simple as breathe or relax or peace. And you just repeat this silently to yourself over and over again. Actually, I'm going to teach you 2 of these because this is I'm just gonna say they're all my favorites, but words of self-kindness includes doing something like just placing your hand over your heart if you like doing that, or you cannot place your hand over your heart. And saying something like, this is hard and I'm doing my best. No expectation of perfection, because as we often say in my grief group, grief is not finishing school. We are not here to be neat and tidy and pretty. It's hard and it's messy and it's runny noses and big tears. And so it's really just this is hard. And you don't even have to say I'm doing my best if that doesn't work for you. Sometimes that's just like too much of an ask for me. But it's really about being gentle with yourself. Prayer, there's many different ways to pray. So if that's something you use, you can certainly turn to that as grounding technique. And then the other one I wanted to teach you is the butterfly hug. And this is another one where you're actually placing your hands on yourself. Just interlace your fingers like that. And then on your collarbone, you just tap back and forth while noticing your breath. What this does is it calms your nervous system through the tapping. It also gives you something to do. And if you pay attention to the sensation you're feeling as you do this, it gives your mind a break. And that is a big part of coping with an intense situation is rather than trying to solve something that might be unsolvable because we can't fix grief. What we can do is tend to it, calm our nervous system, calm our heart, and turn to what matters. So if during this workshop you want to use any of those, please do. And they're also, as I said, part of the coping skills in the worksheet. But the first piece of the worksheet is actually getting really clear about how you feel about the winter holidays. If you're really early in grief, you might just be like, I can't even. That's okay. This is a spot where you can write down, like, I can't even think about the holidays. It's too much. If you're in a place where you are absolutely dreading them, you can write that down. And if you're maybe ambivalent, maybe there's a part of you that's looking forward to being close with your family, but there's also a part of you that hates that you are missing someone. When we did this exercise in my grief group, a woman who has lost her mother this year shared how her whole extended family is going away on vacation to somewhere beautiful for the holidays. And she's looking forward to being away from home. She's looking forward to the time spent with her partner there, but she is not looking forward to the interaction with her family. So by writing that down in the planner, it let us know, what do we need to work with? And so, from that, we're able to be like, all right, how do you deal with people that you're not getting along with right now when you're on an island with them? That is the point of this section. It's not to pretend you feel any way other than you are. It's about to get data and speak your truth. So that's the first step to coping with grief in the holidays, is to be really honest with yourself and be really self-compassionate with the person who's having these feelings. The second step is the coping skills. So we're circling back to that. When I talk about coping skills, I'm referring to little things, or maybe not so little things, that you can do on the spot when you're feeling completely overwhelmed. And I just gave you a list of those things. What can you do to respond to unexpected waves of grief? So you have a few techniques. Here's some mindsets. First, understand that you will get tipped over from time to time during the holidays. As best as you can, know what your triggers are so you can anticipate them. Sometimes a whole human being is a trigger. Understand what you can control and what you can't. The reality is, we can't control how other people behave. That's the biggest one to take into holidays. What we can control is making an attempt to relate to ourselves in a self compassionate way, making an attempt to lean into those coping skills when we need them. You can only control yourself. And I will say, with grief, in fact, the definition I was taught when I was studying thanatology was that grief is the uncontrollable, keyword, uncontrollable reaction to a loss. You aren't deciding to feel this way. You did not choose this. So, how you feel is uncontrollable. What comes after that are the things that you work to control when you can. Keeping track of what helps, and do more of that. If one of those techniques I gave you helps, if walking outside and getting fresh air helps, if putting it on your headphones and listening to calming music helps, do more of that. Know what your best bet is. Know who you need in your life, and that includes people and animals. In my support group, a lot of us have animals we lean on. And know what you need. Sometimes there are creature comforts that help bring us peace. And while we can overdo a lot of different things, especially things like chocolate and alcohol, because grief, by the way, feels like fear. Fear craves salt, sugar, and fat. That's why when we're grieving, that's all we want. Um, I think there's a balance to be struck. I'm never going to give anyone guff for having a Dove chocolate or eating a little more mac and cheese, but also try to lean into those things that are going to be healthy for you in the long term, as well as helpful in the short term. And then finally, designate a physical safe space and an exit plan. We'll talk maybe a little more about this when we get to RSVPing to holiday events, but this is good whether you're at work or at home. And a lot of my clients use their cars as a physical safe space because you can lock the door. An exit plan might be an excuse, a reason why you need to leave. Some people are going to be really understanding when you say, I'm having a grief wave and I need to leave. Other people are going to say, but you can't be alone for the holidays. That's just sad. When inside you're thinking, all I want is to be alone. And so coming up with what you're going to say to people when they try to keep you at an event you don't want to stay at, planning ahead for that is going to be a really good strategy. That was coping skills. The next piece is self care activities. The difference between coping skills and self care: coping skills are things you do on the spot in the heat of the moment. Self care activities are things you plan to do regularly. So a little something every day. I say schedule something 3 to 5 minutes a day. That can make a huge difference. It doesn't need to be an hour or 2 hours of yoga or meditation or whatever, going to the gym. Just needs to be a little something that's like a touchstone back into yourself. And I actually have an article on my website that links from, there's a URL, there's a link down on all these slides that goes through these steps. There is a link in there to how to create your own 5-minute self care daily plan that I highly recommend. So it could be taking deep breaths, savoring your tea or coffee, stepping outside for fresh air. That's one of my go tos. So regularity is really important. Um, Now, this first one, schedule a checkup with your healthcare provider. Probably only do that once, but this is important if you have experienced a loss recently. It's good to go in to whoever your healthcare provider is and get a baseline check because grief is a very stressful experience. And while not a doctor, so I will not give medical advice, I will tell you the research shows that for most people, things like antidepressants do not actually help with grief unless you are also diagnosed with depression. That's what the research says. Up to you to make your decisions, but grief is a natural human experience. And the research shows that if you go on antidepressants without having the depression, your grief may be prolonged. Um, so make sure you take that information in with you and make a wise choice for yourself when you do see your healthcare provider. But I highly recommend going in. Now, the things you are going to do regularly, the givens, sleep, which is hard when you're grieving. I have plenty of articles on my website. You can Google grief insomnia. I usually come up first. But anything around sleep hygiene that you can find is really important. And that includes things like setting a regular bedtime, even if you don't fall asleep, having a regular wake up time, and having a practice, something that you do before bed that lets you transition from the day. For many of my grieving clients, that might include meditation or journaling. For many people, it might be looking at a picture of your loved one and saying good night. That's not something the average sleep hygienist is going to know, but it helps you feel connected to your loved one. And grief isn't about letting go or decaffecting from the relationship. It's about learning how to live your life fully while maintaining a loving connection. Because even though they're not physically present, they've influenced your life and they're going to continue to influence your life. And that's normal and okay and healthy. So, nutrition, important, hydration, and movement. Those are just what all humans should be doing anyway. Might be extra hard when you're grieving, but try to fit it in. The next thing is to schedule time ahead to enjoy the people and animals around you. Schedule alone time doing something pleasurable or creative. And even if you're not in a place where you can maybe enjoy something yet, the idea of enjoying is like a bridge too far. Do something that gives you some quiet time if that works for you. For me, after major losses, I tend to get more athletic is a stretch. When my stepfather died, I picked up a tennis ball and just hit it angrily at the wall for like an hour. You know, it can be really anything, but just giving yourself that time to be with yourself. If it's pleasurable or creative, that's going to help build the resilience. And by the way, even though I was angry when I was hitting those tennis balls, there was something really pleasurable and satisfying about that too. So don't think that the two things can't coexist. Often grief can coexist with many other feelings. And again, to reiterate, regular daily, weekly, and monthly self care activities. So on this sheet, you'll have a little place where you can write down what your self care activities are, and you can check off whether it's something you're going to do daily, weekly, or monthly. The next suggestion is leaning into your support systems. I've probably already mentioned this back in coping skills and in self care because I think it is the people and the animals around us where most of us get a lot of our comfort. And so Support systems can be anybody, close friends, family members, support groups, religious, spiritual, and civic organizations, therapists, and other grief professionals. And last week, when we were going through support systems in my grief group, one person said, don't leave out a cleaning service because sometimes someone who can come in and just vacuum your rug is a support when you're grieving. And I agree 100%. Any kind of service that you can receive counts as support if it's taking the pressure off of you. Now, not everybody is going to be supportive. And by the way, back to this last slide, plan ahead whenever you can, because once the holidays hit, you know how busy things are or how you may not have so much energy. And so making sure that maybe once a week you have a check-in with a close friend or a therapist, having that on your calendar is going to make you feel so grateful when that day shows up and it's already planned. So difficult people, gosh, again, this isn't just an hour webinar. This is like a 5 day seminar, because we are going to run into these people. But here are my best tips. One is practice self kindness, yourself first. As somebody who grew up as a people pleaser, which I think part of that stems from being in a grieving family. Ever since I was little, I just want to make everybody happy. I wanted people to smile, center of attention. Um, Learning how to not self abandon in these holiday scenarios is not something I learned until probably about 4 or 5 years ago. Seriously, how to show up for myself, how to say, no, not today, or how to say, I'm not okay with this, or how to remove myself from a difficult situation. Now, sometimes you can't do that. You know, um, if my grandparents were alive, I would probably still show up because they're grandparents. But what I would do differently is when I'm noticing people were behaving in ways I wasn't comfortable with, is I would acknowledge, like, this is hard for me. This is hard for me, and I deserve to feel peace in this moment. And I'd listen to my body. Maybe I need some deep breaths. Maybe I need to phone a friend. The second tip is to reflect on common humanity. You are part of a world of people who are experiencing grief. You are not the only one grieving. And I say that not to diminish your grief, but to help you feel more connected to people. And as far as common humanity with difficult people, can you remember a time when you were difficult to be around? And again, that's not to criticize or judge yourself at all. I'm not about that, but it's about understanding what might be going on in this person's life where they're difficult, especially if they're grieving too. And that common humanity is part of self compassion. For me personally, when I can look at someone who's acting in a difficult way around me and I can be like, oh, they're hurting too, it doesn't necessarily change what I'm going to do after. I'm not necessarily going to be like, hurt me more, keep saying those mean things, but it's going to allow me to walk away and take care of myself without worrying about how to fix them because it's not my job to fix what they're going through. It's my job not to cause further harm to myself and to other people. Communicate with compassion as best as you can. I'm sorry, but I think I need to leave because I'm hurting is about you rather than saying, you're being a jerk. The caveat here is I am the person who has yelled at a police officer the day my stepfather died. So I know that, and he didn't deserve it. And I apologize later. I know that grief can make us be so on edge and so raw that what comes out of our mouths isn't necessarily kind. And that happens. That's human too. But if there's a way to soften the tension, we can try it, right? Have a plan B, which includes somewhere else you need to be. I've had friends who were on call, and I could be like, oh, this has been great, but I have to go meet so and so at the coffee shop at 8 o'clock. That's not a lie because that person's on call. And I'll be like, I'm on the way, and they'll know to show up. So have something, if you're somebody who doesn't even like to do white lies, go ahead and schedule something that's optional with somebody who understands. Take a pass. You can always say no to difficult events. And in the RSVP section in a moment, we'll talk about exactly how to do that. Wrapping yourself in white light and blessing them is actually a tip I got from a healer around dealing with a difficult person. And that image allowed me to go into a situation with someone that I knew was going to be challenging and push my buttons. I knew my triggers and just imagine that I was protected by this white light. And then I'm saying, may they be happy. May they be at peace. May they not suffer. May I be happy. May I be at peace. May I not suffer. Very powerful. And that's actually the meta meditation, offering someone the same well wishes that you offer back to yourself. Going in with that attitude, again, it acknowledges that we all want happiness and peace, connectivity, but it also doesn't force it because sometimes we just can't make it happen. And so, down on the bottom of the worksheet, when you get to it, you're going to see there's a place for you to name the people or the services you're going to connect with, put down an actual date of when you're going to schedule it and whether it's going to be in person, on the phone, or virtual. Are you going to go to holiday events? Yes or no? A big part of this is sitting down, getting quiet, and evaluating your emotional capacity for that event. You can consider how significant that event is, trust your instincts. And if you decide to say no, and I want to give you all permission that, not that I'm any authority over you, but actually do have a little permission slip in my grief journal book, From Grief to Peace. If you want to just say Heather gave me permission to say no, that helps you, great. You can offer thanks for the invitation. You can express your gratitude. You can say, as you know, I'm going through a really hard time right now, and I need to prioritize my well being, which means I need to take a pass this year. You can be honest and brief, and you can always offer to connect later. That's how to say no. And on your worksheet, you can list out the events, you can decide whether you're going to attend or not. And there's a little place where you can practice scripting your no thank you, which you can use these days in a text or an email or a voice message. You don't even necessarily have to talk to somebody on the phone these days, which can be easier if you think they're going to try to convince you to show up anyway. As for holiday traditions, these are big because they usually involve more than one person. It's usually about you and your extended family. And so I recommend first sitting down and looking at these traditions through your own eyes and then considering how it is for your group or your culture or your friends or family. And sometimes this can be a really connecting conversation. This year, who's going to put the lights on the tree? Dad always did this. Decide, are we handing this down? Are we going to do it all together? Are we going to skip doing the tree this year? And so when we get to the worksheet, I'm inviting you to go through each holiday tradition you have and mindfully choose whether you're going to keep it, whether you're going to skip it, or whether you're going to modify it. I remember the year after my grandfather died, and my mother decided that instead of putting up a Christmas tree, we were going to just start we are going to go a little easier. We were going to start decorating the mantle with a garland and hanging the ornaments and the lights on that because that was always granddaddy's job. And this made it easier for the rest of us, and it also kind of, I think, for us, acknowledged that a season had changed in our life. Um, but my granddaddy still kept putting money in my stocking like 20 years after his death. She kept that tradition going. And it would say, like, love granddaddy on it. So that one mattered to me. The tree, not as much. It's about getting clear on what matters to you. And just because you skip something this year, it doesn't mean you have to skip it forever. You can always bring it back, which, by the way, trees are back in our family. So list your holiday decisions or traditions and decide whether to keep, modify, or release based on your values and based on your capacity for doing it. And then finally on the worksheet is creating a new tradition. And this is really around honoring the love that remains between you and the special people in your life. Now, if you are grieving somebody who was difficult or challenging, and the idea of maintaining the connection isn't for you, then I suggest creating a tradition that is around you and your own self care or you and the life you want to create. But for those of you who are grieving somebody that you miss, you can reflect on the cherished memories you have, holiday and not holiday. You can select the emotions that you want to embody in the new tradition. So if the person that you want to honor was particularly funny, maybe you decide you want to do something humorous. If they were particularly compassionate, maybe you want to bring compassion in. If there's joy, bring in joy. So you're getting clear on what that person brought to you and embodying that in what you're going to do from here on out to honor the relationship. And you can brainstorm these ideas either with yourself or with your family members, depending on how you like to do this. Here's just a couple of the more popular ideas that I see people do. A memory jar is where everybody that gathers together writes down on a little slip of paper what they a favorite memory, and then during the meal or before presents or whenever somebody everybody draws one out and reads the memory, whether it's theirs or not, or maybe you read your own memory. A candle lighting at the table to honor their presence, an empty seat at the table. I actually went to this wasn't holiday specific, but it was a family member's birthday. It wasn't my family, it was a friend's family member's birthday. And they put a seat at the table for the father who had died. And it was a crab feast. And they picked out the biggest crab from the pile and they put it at his seat. And so he was with us and we talked about him and what he would say. It was a really just beautiful, um, loving act from people that I didn't know would even know to do that. It was a really lovely surprise. Um, a charitable act in honor of something they believed in. If they were someone who was into nature, like my granddaddy was a hunting, fishing type of a guy, and my mom and I would walk through the trail in North Carolina and talk about him, telling stories, writing an annual letter to the loved one, telling them, updating them on what's happening in the family. A lot of times we send those out to people. What about writing it to your loved one? And recipe remembrance is very popular in my group where we actually share our loved one's favorite recipes, whether it was something they made or something they like to eat. So these are a bunch of steps that are all going to be on this worksheet. I wanted to just close that if you do have children that are grieving in your life, and this comes from little Heather, but also it comes from the work from really wonderful thanatologist named William Warden. Allow this year to be different. I'm not sure what had happened to the last word on the next bullet point, but understand the developmental differences around death for children. So when children are aged 3 to 5, they tend to believe that death is an actual physical relocation and that the person exists somewhere. Ages 5 to 9, they tend to personify it and think it can be avoided. And then 9 to 10 is usually where they start to understand that death is inevitable and irreversible. And I want to say from the 7-year-old Heather, there were about 2 years where I thought my uncle was still alive because of things the adults said. Um, and so just be aware that allowing children to ask questions, you don't necessarily have to Give them every single thing, especially if it's information you don't think they can handle. Invite them to ask questions of you, and then you can give them age appropriate advice. And also realizing that children are very, very resilient. One moment they might be bawling and missing someone, the next minute they might want to throw ball and play, and that is just normal oscillation of children and grief. Balance new and old traditions. Don't pretend it didn't happen. Ask them how they would like to remember their special person, and you can ask yourself that too. Consider age appropriate volunteer opportunities and stick to their routines as best as you can, but allow some flexibility. So if bedtime is 8:30 and they want to stay up and talk about dad, let them do that. Allow some flexibility for both of you. It's a time to connect. So I want to take a moment and just remind us that the whole point of this is to tend to our suffering, to tend to what hurts so that you can have a meaningful holiday. And one way you can tend to your suffering is by leaning into your local resources too. And I want to turn it over to Wanaka, who I know has some Lexington supports to share.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. This has been really enlightening for me as well. Thank you for sharing all these great resources. Thank you for sharing the holiday planner. I think I'm going to use that with my clients. But yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know about what we have available here at Lexington. So I am one of the social workers in the Lexington Human Services. We have a host of resources. We collaborate on many programs such as this one. Um, we also can help with referrals to therapists. We do therapy ourselves. We have a senior services department working with everyone over 65, where you offer supports there, and also family, youth and family, everyone under 65. We have a veteran service, and then we also have transportation. So we offer short-term referrals, short-term counseling groups. We're currently getting a couple of groups started. We have a coping with change group, which might be of interest for anyone as they're navigating grief and navigating what that looks like in their lives. Um, yeah, and then if there's anything that you feel like would be useful to you, always reach out. I'm hoping Helen will share my information when she sends out the email afterwards. So feel free to reach out to me about any resources that you feel like would be helpful to be offered. And I'm going to throw it back to Heather for Q&A portion.
Great. Thank you, Annika. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, whether it's about grief in the holidays or grief in general, I am happy to answer them. Again, I put a link down there to the holiday planner article on my website, which again will link off to longer articles about each of those steps that you're going to get in the email that Helen's going to send out. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen. By the way, those are my books. If you are a reader, I should probably mention these. Navigating Loss just came out this week on Tuesday, and that's a book that encompasses both death and non-death losses. So financial disruption, divorce, relocation, things that might happen after the death of a loved one. Living with Grief is a guide that helps you walk step by step through a system that I created based on my studies of thanatology to help you cope with grief, but also live fully after a loss. And then From Grief to Peace, which is my most popular one, that's actually a guided journal. So that's a good gift, or if you're someone who likes to write, that will take you through those 8 steps in living with grief, but it has a lot of good prompts in there as well as space for you to write directly in it. And then there's the French version of living with grief, but I don't think we're speaking French on this call. So anyway, we got a couple questions. Um, all right. So grief related to domestic violence and uncovering long-term covert child abuse. So here is what we know from the research. First, before you tend to the grief, you need to tend to the trauma. I don't know where you are on your journey or if you're asking for someone else, but it is really important that first you address the trauma, which is buried deep in the body. The body has traumatic reaction to us being unsafe to try to protect us. And my heart always just sinks and hurts for anybody who has to go through that. But I'm also grateful that we are in an age where there's really good trauma therapy out there. So first, tend to the trauma with a trauma therapist, and then you tend to the grief. Um, it's important for me to say that tending to a non-death loss grief and tending to a death grief is not the 5 stages of grief. We deep bow to Dr. Kubler-Ross and the work she did for dying people. But you'll want to find something like navigating loss, which it's not abuse, but there's some covert emotional abuse in my history. I talk a little bit about that in the book. Um, find a system that's going to help you first express the grief and the emotions of it, and then come back to yourself. Because really, after an abusive situation, your grief work becomes about restoring the relationship with yourself. Whereas after a death where the person was somebody that we wish was still physically around. And I understand there can be very ambivalent feelings in an abusive relationship. In one type of grief, we're looking to maintain the continuing bond with that person. And in another type of grief, we're looking to develop a bond with ourselves, one that was probably denied to us as children. I hope in this short time, I at least shine some light on that for you, but always start with the trauma first because the grief work can't happen until that is tended to. I've had some people attempt to do them side by side, and I don't know if there's any research on that, but from my experience, the the trauma usually takes away um, from the ability to do the grief work. But you could try that, and feel free, Serena, if you want to say whether that helped or not. I hope it did. Um, yeah. Do you have any suggestions for people who are not only grieving the loss of a loved one, but also the loss of a childhood family home? Absolutely, because that has been part of my grief story. There's also a story in navigating loss about that. Um, Non-death losses, while different, obviously, from the death of a person, is about acknowledging what was important about that home and what was lost in that home, not just the home itself, but is it a sense of security? Is it a sense of connection to your family? Is it a sense of your future? So getting really clear on what does this loss mean to you? Why does it matter? And then finding ways to cultivate those things that were lost in that home in other places. So, for instance, when I think about, and you all can laugh because now I think about how funny, how just unlikely it would be, back before my family really fell apart. And believe me, it fell apart in some many, many ways. I remember my dad would always say to me, like, you're going to grow up and you're going to inherit 3 houses. You're going to get our house and, your parental grandparents and your maternal grandparents. And it's not that I felt like, oh, I'm going to be rich in houses, but it was like this warmth was going to continue throughout my life, right? None of those houses are in my family now. And after my divorce, when I sold my house that I was also grieving, I sat down and was like, what is this? What does all this mean to me? And what it means to me is family. All these houses mean family, loss of family, which is also quite true. There isn't a lot of family left. And so I'm having to find how to find that family in other ways through my chosen family, through my friends. And also for me personally, working towards being able to buy that house that becomes my family home. So that's my personal story, but I want you to honor it because the fact that you're asking the question means it matters to you. Again, I hope that's helpful for you. So we have a question too about losing someone to Alzheimer's. and frequently thinking we could have done better for the people that have died after a long-term illness, feeling like we made mistakes, feeling regret, and feeling that we failed them. One of the best, pieces of advice I got around this was from Rabbi Leder, Leder. He wrote a book called The Beauty of What Remains. It's about him caring for his father. And by the way, he had a very difficult relationship with his father and then cared for him through dementia. And I interviewed him on my mindfulness and grief podcast. So if you go to my website, heatherstang.com, and you type in LEDER, that podcast will come up. He said, and this really hit me, that because love has really no bounds, it is just unending and infinite, we will never feel that we did enough. And I found this lands with my family, caregiving for my grandmother, for my clients. I don't know if it lands for you or not. I highly recommend his book. It is a beautiful book. Maybe it's in the library. But sitting with the fact that you wanted to do everything perfect for her, and yet there was so much you didn't know because it hadn't happened yet. And this is one of the big struggles with grief after Alzheimer's, is coming to notice all the things you did do. Our brains tend to look for the negative. It looks for where we failed, but rarely does it ask us to spend time with all the places we succeeded. So hopefully that helps. I'm going to share briefly, this may or may not work for you, but a woman in my group during one of our journaling practices who felt she had not done enough for her mother wrote herself a letter from her mother on her mother's deathbed. So it was the perspective of her mother writing to my client. And in it, the mother listed out all the things her daughter had done to give her a good ending, to take care of her. And that was a very powerful letter, not only for the person who wrote it, but for those of us who were lucky enough to hear it. So I send you comfort. Everybody on this call, you're suffering the loss of something. Um, and a dementia loss, you have many losses along the way. And so I hope that you are as gentle with yourself as you can be, and highly recommend that book. Highly recommend showing yourself mercy and looking at all the things you did do. So those, I think, are all of our questions for now. But feel free, I'm always here to answer questions. You can go on my website, and there's a place to either you can join my grief group, or you can have a private session, or you can just do a private 20-minute consultation with me. If you don't know if any of those are good for you, my email is, and I give out my email, I'm crazy enough to do that because I love my work, is heather@mindfulnessandgrief.com. So I'm happy to give any follow-ups with this. And by the way, Serena asked about how to rebuild trust when it's lost. It goes back to that rebuilding trust in yourself. It's hard. That has been my work over the past 3 years since my divorce and going through financial infidelity with my ex-husband. It has been relearning how to trust myself. That's actually something we do in the grief group, and I do in private sessions too. But I highly recommend, before you worry about trusting other people, again, I don't know your whole situation, but it comes back to trusting you. And when somebody has manipulated us through abuse, if they have taught us not to trust ourselves. I mean, I say in my book, like, trusting myself was a non-starter. It was not allowed. So I really do feel for you, and I'm sending you a lot of care. So thanks for asking these difficult questions.
Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing your stories of grief and sharing all these techniques and strategies. I hope our audience is able to use some of these and to help cope with some of the difficulties during the holidays. So thank you again, Heather. Thank you so much, Wanika, for providing those resources in Lexington. I will send a recap that will include all of this very helpful information. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you again, Heather.
Thank you,
Take care,
Helen.
everyone.
Thank you, Wanika. Thank you, everybody.